Hey there, it's Jamie from jamieedwards.com again, and today I want to talk to you about how technology addiction might be hurting your software career. Now, there's other videos out there all over the place and blog articles and information about how we're addicted to our phones and things like that, but that's not really what this video is about. This video is more about how we can become addicted to shiny new APIs, tools, and frameworks, and how that can actually prevent us from becoming the best that we can be in our software careers. So first, let me tell you a couple stories to just get you to understand sort of the mindset that I've fallen into and many technologists do when they go to work in software development, and how that can actually create addiction and be a problem for you to grow in your career. When I was younger, one of the things my father, who's since passed away, loved was he used to get these magazines. This was in the 80s in the mail, and they were basically these gadget magazines. They're similar to, I think if it's still around, there's a magazine in a lot of airplanes called Sky Mall, and it's basically all kinds of gadgets and widgets and things to make your life easier. And when I was younger, I used to really get interested in reading these too, and they would always have, different inventions and things that were coming out. And I used to, though, kind of think it was interesting how he was a dentist, and he would often buy some of these little widgety things, and he'd kind of get them at the house and mess around with it for a week or two and then not really do anything with it. And it was like it didn't really benefit his life too much. And as I've gotten older and I've been successful in my software development career, at least from the way the world looks at it, and kind of had to reflect on, am I really getting out of my career and out of my life what I want? One of the things that I've fallen into, and many of you probably fall into as well, is just looking at what other people have and what other things are coming onto the market and thinking, ooh, I want that too. And whether it's cars or guitars or any kind of material possession or digital possession that you might be interested in out there, there's always going to be something new coming out. I mean, this isn't probably news to you out there. Keeping up with the Joneses is a losing proposition. And I think, though, many times we don't realize that though we may have a handle on materialism at home and in the rest of our life, at work, it's much more common and destructive than I think we realize it is. And so in this video today, I hope to give you some information that you can just think about, and I'll talk about this more in future videos, that'll hopefully help you have maybe a mindset to be a little bit more realistic and purposeful about how you develop software, how you work with your team, so that you don't get caught up sort of chasing fads and investing yourself in things that aren't going to really actually make you more valuable, even though it may look like it on the surface. So first of all, why are some of the reasons that we as technologists get addicted in the first place to technology and changing technology? Well, first of all, we get bored with the current framework. Many of us come onto a project, and when we're hired, they're looking for expertise in C# or DevOps or UX or any number of technologies out there, and we get onto the project, and a lot of people, this is just a problem with the hiring practices in our industry, will try to look for someone with the specific skills or stack that's on that software product with the thought that they're going to bring them in and they're going to hit the ground running. And I've just found, again, after 20 years of doing this, 20 plus years now, this just is never the case. Yes, it's great that if the primary language the software is written in is Java, if the person you brought into the door knows Java, that's going to help. But, few products today are a pure one technology stack product. They're usually a mishmash of a whole bunch of different technologies. And so I think as technologists, we kind of get that shot in the arm of excitement and newness when we start a new job, because we realize, okay, maybe I was brought in to do SQL work or PostgreSQL or, whatever it is. And once we get on the job, we realize, wow, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. There's a lot of other frameworks and things I haven't worked with. And that kind of feeds our desire to learn and to grow, just to get up to speed on the specific stack or kind of combination of technologies at that company. But eventually we do get bored, and I think there's a couple of different reasons that we get bored other than just repetitiveness, which is the obvious one. One is we get envious of other people. So at some software companies, and I'm going to do a future video about this as well, there are multiple software products. There may be a product that's making a lot of money, but it doesn't have as much room for growth. And so the company's looking at investing in a new product. And oftentimes when that starts to happen, people on the job, your coworkers, they're going to look at getting into a situation where they can be someone who's on that team to give them an opportunity to use that new technology. And if you don't get to be selected to be one of those people, there can be envy, right? There can be, man, I really wish I was the one who got to work on the new product with the new technologies. And that can breed resentment and frustration. And again, I'll talk in a future video about how software companies can really have hiring practices and growth procedures in place to keep people at their company happy and growing, because I think many of them don't do a very good job of this. They actually basically create a situation that causes developers and professionals to want to leave because they just make stupid mistakes about how they manage their talent. But coming back to that, the other thing is, I think oftentimes when we've been using one technology or framework or stack or process for a while, we know everything about it after a while. Maybe not everything, but become very comfortable with it. And so we maybe look at the latest hotness and we start to put these rose-colored glasses on, right? And we see this new technology that we could be using as solving all our problems. And we start to convince ourselves, oh, if I could just use this latest Node.js framework, or if I could just use this new Hadoop query language, or whatever you're looking at out there. Maybe you read a blog post or you went and looked at an open source project and you saw one aspect of your software that you're working with today that seems like it would be simpler in that other framework. And so we start to kind of justify to ourselves, I'm not going to be happy until I actually get a chance to use that new technology. So now that you kind of understand a little bit about, at least from my perspective, kind of the mindset that we can get into that causes us to begin to get addicted to technology changing and always chasing the newest, latest fad, let me talk a little bit about how this can actually hurt your career. It's hurt mine in the past. I've gotten much better at this, especially once I got into consulting a decade ago. I had to focus a lot more on just getting my clients results. And I couldn't, concern myself so much with, am I using the latest, greatest technology that I want to? Because at the end of the day, if I wanted that client to bring me back in for future work, they don't really care if I'm using the latest technology or if, all my coworkers are excited. They just want stuff to get done. So the first problem is, and this is probably pretty obvious, but it needs to be at least mentioned, is when we get sort of addicted to that feeling of newness and shiny new APIs and frameworks, we often fail to master the one that we're already using. And this is something that I'm sure if you're someone who's been doing software development for maybe 5, 10 plus years, and you've had to manage or lead software development teams as an architect or a tech lead or whatever term you want to call it, you're writing code, but you're responsible for other people. It can be really frustrating when other people on your team don't seem to be able to produce things as fast as you, or they don't seem to understand things that you might consider basic. And I think one of the reasons this can be the case, especially if you have people working under you that maybe have 10 years experience and you're frustrated with them, is they have hopped frameworks or hopped APIs so many times in their career that they're really good at learning new things, but they've never really mastered the essentials of software development or UX or support, whatever practice that is related to delivering the product. I can say for me, where I have probably the most experience in software development and programming, I work with people all the time who know, let's say, React really well, or they know, some other framework that's very hot in the market, maybe machine learning or something like that. But then I look at, for example, how they design the data storage that they're going to put in their store, how they create relationships between objects, where, how they write business logic, how they think, and they're still at a very junior level. They haven't really learned to really master some essentials of computer science and software development. And a lot of this is not stuff that you get taught in school. It's very popular out there to go to Elite Code or HackerRank or some of these different sites and try to, beat all these different questions to get hired. But then a lot of these people who, they're masters of algorithms, they come into a company and simply matching the technology to the business need and getting it done and getting it to perform. It blows my mind sometimes at how bad they are at this. So one of the things you can do to help yourself not become one of these people is, if you feel sort of stuck using a technology or a framework that isn't what you'd like, and maybe you want to grow, take a look at whether there's something you can do with the current technology that you're working with that'll help you master some universal aspect of software development. Something that okay, if I really button down and focus on understanding maybe the business better, or the relationships between the objects, or the best way to model this situation with my technology, that I'd be doing the same thing if I moved to a different technology stack. I would still have to master, how do I make this modeled and make sense in this business domain? That's going to help you grow in a way that is much, I think it's going to give you much more return on investment of your time than just jumping to a new framework. So the second thing that I think happens, that, and I've done this too, again, that causes us to fail in our software development careers to really get the rewards we want, the recognition, to really grow, to get the opportunities we want, when we sort of get addicted to always trying out new technologies, is we often focus on just mastering the details of the technology over understanding the business problem at the company we work at. So an example of this is, I had a client that I've worked with, done multiple contracts with over the last decade, and they're sort of in the student housing space, and they manage a whole bunch of different, basically really luxurious apartments that students that are going to college that have pretty rich parents can send them to. And so if you think about it, if you've got these really expensive apartments, one of the top things that business domain has as a problem is capacity planning. They need to actually know at all times who's renting which apartments, who's thinking of renting apartments, how many of them are vacant, things like that. Well, that's a problem that's specific to that business. And you could use Ruby or C# or Node.js or, any number of technologies to implement that business problem. But just understanding what are some of the unique challenges that this business has different than, let's say, an e-commerce website, which that's all going to be about transactions and relevance and things like that. It's a totally different problem domain. And I find sometimes, and I used to fall into this as well a lot, especially before consulting, when I get to a situation where I'm frustrated because I don't seem to be producing code fast enough or deliverables fast enough, I'll often blame the framework. And what it really is just a failure for me to sit down with the business and speak with non-technical people and understand what is it about this business that's unique, and then map that to the best way to implement it in the software. So you can really help your software development career a lot, I think, if you get more of an affinity or an appreciation for the business and figure out what's unique about this business. How do I actually find the most elegant, best way to architect or design this in the software and whatever language or framework I'm using, and understand that really well, and maybe not be so hung up on, am I using every single language feature or technology feature that I could be using? And ultimately, what does this result in? And why would that hurt your career? Well, what it ultimately results in is a failure to deliver results. Ultimately, the business is paying you to produce something. And even though they may want to hire a hotshot programmer in a specific language that, their current employees say is what they need, at the end of the day, no matter what the language is, if you can't produce value quickly enough that the company can stay afloat, you're not going to be a very valuable resource. And I find earlier in my career, maybe the first 5 years of my career, it seemed like I got a lot of appreciation from my peers by always knowing whatever was new. Whatever new technology was coming out, I was on top of it before anybody else. I was trying to find ways to use it in the product. And all my technical coworkers, other programmers, other software development managers really liked that about me. And, it was very exciting and attractive. But the management became very frustrated often with that because, every time we have to learn a new technology, it's not just us that has to master and learn it. It's everybody on the team. And I've found that on most teams, and this has just been my experience, that there's varying degrees of how much people like to learn new things and how quickly they can come up to speed. And I think some software companies look at it like a good software development team should be full of people that can learn anything at any time. And while that would be great, in my experience, the reality is it's just simply not true. There's some people, and there's nothing wrong with this, that just take a little longer to learn. And so every time we introduce new technology or new frameworks or APIs into a software project, we can actually hurt our career by causing us to fail to deliver results. And last, I want to just talk about how industry hiring practices kind of create this vicious cycle where this continues to be a problem in the industry, and it can bait you into it and cause you to really hamper your career if you get sucked into this. So the first thing is there's many companies out there that have job requests out, right? You go up to LinkedIn or monster.com or any number of the thousands probably at this point, at least hundreds of sites that are out there trying to match employers with employees. And I look at some of these positions that are out there just for like a senior developer or something like that, and they'll be open for 3 months. And, these are companies that they're losing money every day that they don't have someone in the door. And so many of these companies, I think they're looking for this sort of perfect person who's going to come along and know the exact technologies that they know and impress them on an interview with the thought that they're going to bring them in and they're going to hit the ground running, and then they'll just be able to be productive. And the reality in my experience is that, as I talked about in the beginning of this video, there's always a ramp up time or a learning time for any resource. And often these companies, I think, don't realize they're actually wasting money by not just bringing someone in who's proven that they actually can learn versus that they might know every one of the technologies that they're looking for. So you got to watch out a little bit, especially if you're someone who's maybe a hiring manager or somebody who's in charge of bringing talent onto your team. If you're looking for that perfect person, but you're passing up candidates that have a lot of experience with many frameworks, but maybe they have less experience with the latest thing that your company's using, you're actually losing money every day that goes by that you don't have anybody, and anybody's going to have to do some learning when they get onboarded onto your project. Now, obviously, you don't want to bring someone on who's totally clueless in the stack that you're using, but I think there's too much emphasis spent on trying to find perfect matches, and it really creates some of the other situations I'm going to talk about. So another one that just is really frustrating, I think, to me and anybody who's been doing this a long time, and is part of the reason I got into consulting, is this whole situation where people get pigeonholed into a specific stack. So what do I mean by this? Well, somebody, let's say, develops Java for 5 years and they become really good at Java as well as the whole ecosystem of all the other technologies and frameworks that surround Java. And so let's say time goes by and they want to now get involved in something other than Java. They now have to go out and actually study themselves and find a way outside of their job to level up their skills and sort of prove to the industry or a hiring manager that they actually can do this new thing. And in my experience, what ends up happening with this, and this is really the point of this video, is when companies are always looking for the latest, greatest technology expertise to be demonstrated in interviews, they're really missing out on basically avoiding repeating mistakes that were made by previous developers. So what do I mean by this? Well, kind of going back to the original points that I made earlier in the video, when I started out in my career, I didn't know how to model, let's say, for example, data very well. And I didn't know very well how to decouple things. And I didn't know very well how to structure a code base or a technology solution so things were named where they match the words the business uses. This is kind of one of the things, if you've ever read Eric Evans' book on domain-driven development, he talks about. And so I got really good with the technology, but I didn't really know how to create it in a scalable, understandable fashion and also make it really match the business problem so it could be extended and understood by everybody. And by the time I understood how to do that at a company, I had this sort of inflated opinion of myself. Oh, I'm an architect. I know all this stuff. And the next time I went on to a new company's project, I was immediately humbled in realizing, actually, wow, this is a totally different business. This is a totally different problem. It needs to be modeled completely differently. And I had to learn that all over again. And once I did that same thing of leaving one company and going to another, and then when I got into consulting, as I've shared in my other videos, I mean, it was like company after company after company after company, all with different business models. Then I started to learn how to really, when I go into a company, understand the business really well and understand the unique problems with their business and how those map to technology, and be able to really quickly come into a door, understand that, and start producing value quicker than a lot of people. And because the industry, is so focused on trying to bring people in that have a technology match, it really creates this situation where by the time somebody at a company like myself or anybody else has gotten really experienced and finally learned those lessons about how to model things to map them to the business domain, those people usually get treated kind of poorly because they want more money, they want more opportunity, and if the company doesn't know how to allow them to grow, which, like I said, I'm going to talk about that in a future video, oftentimes those people leave. And that's why, the average stay for most software developers at companies is 2 years. Well, that same company, if they lose their talent, often will look for a cheap new resource that's really promising in, let's say, a new technology that's now hot, or whatever they want to use, and they bring that person in and they maybe interview them and make sure they know that technology, but they haven't built up the work experience and the career experience to really make really sound and good decisions when they're going about structuring the code and working with their team, so that they're not repeating the same mistakes that the people that they just lost, unfortunately, had to learn through the school of hard knocks. So how are you dealing with this kind of addiction that we can often go through in our careers that causes us to always chase the latest technology and not really learn the fundamentals? Leave me your comments below. If you're new to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. You can click the little bell icon next to the subscribe link and it'll actually notify you when new videos are available. I'm also on Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and SoundCloud if you'd rather listen to this as a podcast, and you can like me on Facebook. So until next time, thanks.